All right, so at the recording of this podcast episode for Open Wheel FM, we are just a couple of days away from the premier American motorsport spectacle, the Indy 500. This last week, we were given quite the qualifying session with a lot of, let's just say, unpredictable circumstances with the weather on Saturday, which gave us a compacted schedule on Sunday. Nevertheless, it did give us some very good qualifying for us fans to be able to watch. And obviously the conditions that the teams and the drivers had to go through, it was good to see a little bit of that. It definitely added to the suspense of the weekend for sure, but nevertheless, it was Alex Palou, of course, who stood atop and will be leading the charge out of the gates for the 2026 Indy 500. Whether or not someone will be usurping him for the victory across the bricks this weekend, we will have to wait and see. Now, I'm going to be running through in this week's episode of the Open Wheel FM podcast. We'll be talking all about what happened during the chaotic qualifying that took place this past weekend, as well as going over both of the races that took place in Monaco for Formula E this weekend. And then I'll also be kind of giving my thoughts on Formula One going into Montreal this weekend. There's a lot of racing, a lot of open wheel action. It's just that time of year, right? But I'm excited for this week's episode to really be able to dig into all of that. And I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I enjoy doing it myself. If for any reason you love the content, and I hope you do, don't be afraid to give this episode a like on your listening platform of choice, as well as a follow on that platform of choice. It helps me, and to obviously be able to be seen. The goal for me is to make this the premier open wheel motorsport podcast, and the one that you go to for all your Formula One, IndyCar, and Formula E information, news, technical stuff. That's the goal, right? So if you like this, make sure to give this a like and also share it. Maybe there's someone in your life that enjoys this kind of thing as much as you do and as much as I do. So, but with all of that being said, I wanted to jump into the first part, which was the big one, which was the Indy 500 qualifying, and probably the one that you're probably wanting to know a lot about. If you were living under a rock this weekend or weren't following through, don't worry, I got you. But yeah, so before qualifying started, we did get some news from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in addition to IndyCar, that they would be changing the qualifying in terms of how they decided to do it going into the weekend. We ultimately did not end up getting that session or that idea of the sessions that they had wanted because of the weather forecasting. But really the big change was, and this is in part due to Fox having the airtime, but also I don't know why they're deciding to change it up, but they decided, hey, let's change this up and add an additional qualifying session overall. So initially, with 33 cars going into qualifying this past weekend, depending on your first runs, the top 9 in that first running would go into the top 12. The drivers from 10 to 15 would do an additional qualifying, where the top 3 of that session would then go into that top 12, starting at the bottom of the top 12. And from there, the top 12 would then go into the Fast 6. My honest opinion on this is, to me, it just doesn't make any sense for that positioning, at least for figuring out who's 13 through 15. I get it, right? If you're in the top 3, okay, well, I guess you go into the top 12 and you have to then qualify again with potentially you being able to find time in the top 12 to then go to the Fast 6. It's just potentially a team would have to then qualify 4 different times to see where they start on the grid. Like I said, this was all done by Fox because of the airtime that they needed and the space that they had, currently picked out for the Indy 500 qualifying this past weekend. For them, I get it. As an audience, I don't really get it. Now, I would say, thankfully, we didn't end up having to go through all that. We had to go through something completely different because on Saturday, it was a washout completely. No qualifying was done at all, which meant that everything in terms of where the starting grid was going to line up, who was going to be on pole position, was all going to happen the following day on Sunday. Now, Sunday was the complete opposite from Saturday. If Saturday was the rainy part of the day, Sunday was bright and sunny for the most part, with very high track temperatures, and just basically cramming all of it into that. They got rid of the 10 through 15 qualifying and just went from everyone to the top 12 and then into the Fast 6. Did it give us a good qualifying session with how it did? Thankfully it did. And I did, make a note in my podcast notes that I wanted to add into this, was just kind of like a little tidbit. I do think that the session was overall it was significantly more difficult for the teams and the drivers to be able to execute that in a single day within the parameters of what they were given. Obviously, there was some advantages for getting the 1, 2, 3 pick in qualifying, right, going out first rather than waiting later on during the day when track temperatures got up to be 111 degrees, which is quite hot. And, if you're going around 4 times and you're trying to obviously maximize your average speed, the degradation plays into that. So it was a little bit more challenging for those that picked the later numbers to actually have success making it into the top 12. There was less margin of error there. But I will say that it was very impressive that there was no accidents during qualifying. Obviously, an accident would have been bad because we don't want any of the drivers getting hurt. But because of the circumstances with it all being packed together, they just couldn't really afford to, have significant pauses to, clean up the track, get the car off the track, and all of that fun stuff because of the weather delay that pushed them into Sunday to begin with. So the first leg of qualifying started. Scott Dixon was the one who drew the number 1. So he went out first, actually put up a time that got him into the top 12. As you will see, a considerable number of the top 12 participants to move on to the next round were in the earlier stages. It was, for him, he went out first, and it wasn't until 5 hours later that he ended up going back out onto the track for his second time around in the top 12. Rosenqvist was basically the cut of the field for most of Sunday, with the exception of his last run in the Fast 6. I mean, this guy was over 0.5 faster in terms of the average speed comparatively to the second place person, which was David Malukas, who also got pushed into the top 12. I mean, he's been doing great this year, and so, but that was just the gap between first and second and the rest of the field. It was whatever, if it was the Wheaties, whatever it may be. I mean, Rosenqvist came out firing on all cylinders and looked dominant And it wasn't even just in the first session where we got into the top 12, but it was also, it was when during the top 12, he also was the first place person in that. All three Chip Ganassi cars, so Alex Palou, Scott Dixon, and Kyffin Simpson all got into the top 12. Pretty good for their showing. Juxtapositionally to that was Andretti, who, with a team, the story, the legacy, the branding, with the talent of their driving roster that they have, them being unable to qualify for the top 12, not a single one did, was pretty disappointing. And hopefully, I mean, the broadcasters said this too, but hopefully Andretti can bring it during the race, and maybe it was just a fluke in qualifying for the team, but it was definitely not a great Sunday for them to not even have a single driver in the top 12 in qualifying at all. Drawing was a considerable decider in this qualifying, I would say, at least to get into the top 12. Once they got into the top 12, I would say the roles kind of flipped, and that the cars that went later on in the first session had more like or similar conditions going into the top 12, which I think helped them out. And I think this is also specifically where Alex Palou was able to really shine and push his car into being the best driver overall, but also being able to make up the most ground as he qualified P11 going into the top 12. He then pushed that and ended up putting up the second fastest time in the top 12 to secure himself the spot in the Fast Six. And I think that having that and the setup and the car just coming alive with a driver like Alex Palou, it just all kind of came together for him, and that was a success. And there was a couple other drivers that I will also say I thought had drawn a pretty tough number, but was able to overperform expectations. The first one that comes to my mind is Alexander Rossi, who, I mean, let's be real, he is actually very good at, Indianapolis 500. He is a race winner here as well. He just gets this track, and whatever they did at Ed Carpenter to set up his car for qualifying, he looked lights out. He was so good. He narrowly missed out on the top six. I think he did. I think he was the sixth fastest time in the first session. Was able to narrowly get into the Fast Six, just barely. And that was enough then for him to set the second fastest time in the Fast Six to sit himself alongside Alex Palou in what, could have been potentially an Alexander Rossi pole position, which would have been, it would have been incredible. I would have loved to see that. I'm a huge fan of Alexander Rossi, and I just like the guy speaks his mind. But, he was so close, but it was Alex Palou that kind of nudged him through. But for him, he started towards the latter half as his number was drawn a little bit later during warmer conditions. He was still able to get a lot from that car and carry that through. And I think on his third running of the car, I think he understood where he needed to go. The car was obviously set up really well for him. Some other standout performers that I wanted to highlight during qualifying was Caio Collet, who was the only rookie to make it into the top 12. Unfortunately, after the race, it was found that there was some illegal modifications to his car, but I mean, he looked very, very strong going into that top 12 to potentially push for a Fast Six. He did fumble in the top into the top 12 unfortunately, but he looked very strong, and obviously with this being his first running of the Indy 500 this year, I think that he is definitely a driver that we need to look out for in the future, because I think he is going to cause some problems and potentially win the Indy. I'm calling it here. I think that Caio Collet has the potential, maybe not this year, but definitely in a couple years' time, to be able to compete for a win, just because he looked so confident. He was very excited to get on the track, and he just had the biggest smile on his face the entire time. So for him, he had a great showing in qualifying, just really unfortunate with the penalty to his car. He'll be starting from the very back, but it will be interesting to see what he can do. Another driver that stood out very, very significantly was Santino Ferrucci. It was quite funny during the interviewing between the sessions. Him and his team were saying that the car was spec'd out for the race and not for qualifying. Well, this guy was able to get into the Fast Six, and whether that was through sheer willpower or whatever sandbagging comments they were making, or maybe they really were a car that was designed for the race, and somehow they were able to qualify better than expectations, which it sounded like that might have been the case based on the comments that they made. But, I mean, he had a great showing for himself. Will be starting on the second row of the Indy 500 this upcoming weekend. So a very, very good showing for him. We know that he's always been a pretty good driver here at Indianapolis. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can maybe, if you're within, I would say, the first 2, maybe 3 rows, you actually have a pretty considerable chance to potentially go for the win, right? So the odds are definitely a lot more favorable the further up the grid that you go, and he set himself really, really well. And then I also wanted to come back to David Malukas. I think that, this driver coming into the circumstances, right, he was going to go and run for McLaren. That injury could have potentially costed him his career, he said, in terms of him losing the McLaren seat. Has been able to find his way into a top team of Penske and has done nothing but exceed expectations, I would say, for most of the people across the paddock, across fans, pundits alike. He's looked lights out, and his confidence, the maturity that he has, all of that combined has made him a considerable threat throughout the season, but particularly here at the Indy 500 qualifying session, he just looked very, very strong. He was up there contesting for the pole position before Alex Palou was able to do his run later on with Alexander Rossi, right? So narrowly missed out. I want to say it was by maybe a tenth of his average speed. It was so close that it was definitely something that I think raised a lot of eyebrows, especially because, again, he's coming into a top team for his first year with Penske, and he showed out, I would say. And he's been doing that all season long. David Malukas, unfortunately, he wasn't able to get the road victory, was beaten by Lundgaard in the latter stages of the race, but his race win will be coming. Could it be Indy 500 this year? Who knows? I wouldn't put it past him. He is a very talented driver. And then I also wanted to highlight Pato O'Ward, who, we know what he's capable of in the Indy 500. Unfortunately, he was able to make it into the Fast Six, but the car, the setup with that just wasn't him. It was very all over the place, very unstable. You could definitely tell he was uncomfortable driving the car. The fact that he was even able to make it up into the Fast Six is still very impressive, and I think shows a testament to him as a driver, the grit that he has. So he is starting in the front two, the front two groups. Can I see it potentially being his year? I don't know. I mean, again, anyone has that potential. The further up the grid you have, I would say if there was a driver on the grid that I feel like after Joseph Newgarden ripping that victory away from him at the very end, I really want to see a Pato victory here. Are we going to get it? I'm not sure. I don't really know how that McLaren is going to be in race trim come this weekend, but I wish him the best, and I really do hope that if he is in the running to win, I hope that he is the driver that's able to get across. And that's not just the bias. I think most of the fan base overall can probably get behind that after narrowly being able to win the race and then just losing it in the final few corners was just heartbreaking to see. So he has a shot. We'll just have to, I guess we'll find out this next weekend. But with Alex Palou standing on pole position, this is his second pole position in the Indy 500. Obviously, we know that in 2023, he was victorious. I mean, not victorious, I meant he was on pole position in 2023. He was victorious last year in 2025. Will he be able to convert that pole position into a victory? This is the first time since 2011 or 2010 where Helio Castroneves was able to win the previous year and convert to a pole position the following year. Alex Palou's in a great spot. I think he's won this race before. I think he's still racing the best race. Like, I think he has the ability. I think he's the cut of the class in IndyCar. So I wouldn't put it past him. And obviously we know that he has an incredible pit crew surrounding him that I wouldn't put it past him to win. Ricky Davis, Barry Wozner, Julian Robertson, all incredible people that work under that number 10 car. So very exciting to see how that all plays out. Please let me know below who you think may be winning and coming victorious for this year's Indy 500. If I had to make a guess on who I think is going to win, I would say Alexander Rossi. The only thing is the injury that he sustained in practice, which it was confirmed actually today. So Thursday, the day that I'm posting this, that he did get clearance and will be okay to race starting P2. I am actually going to come out and say I think David Malukas will be the one that ultimately claims the checkered flag and crosses the bricks in Indy this upcoming weekend. I'm just going to be boisterous. That would be incredible for his first victory in IndyCar to be at the Indy 500. So that's my vote. Let me know who you think is going to be coming out on top. All right, so going across the pond, we did see this last weekend was round 10 and 11 of Formula E in Monte Carlo. In what was actually a pretty good race, I would say. I mean, there was some... it's way different when you watch Formula E compared to Formula One. I think that's like in Monte Carlo. Just being able to see what is going on, obviously the different mechanics that are at play with the pit boost and then the attack mode, and also just the cars are significantly smaller. There's just a lot more opportunity to overtake and pass. It will be interesting, obviously, to see how Formula One performs this year with the smaller cars, but Formula E has always done pretty well in Monte Carlo, and this weekend was it was the same. It did provide us some pretty good racing overall. So starting off with the first race on Saturday, it was Dan Ticktum who qualified on pole position. It was a very surprising pole position, but he did look very, very fast throughout his qualifying. It was, it was very surprising, but definitely deserved from him. And it wasn't just the first race that he qualified on pole position, but it was also the second race he qualified on pole position, which is impressive in and of itself as well, the fact that you qualify on pole position twice. So he was just very fast over a single lap. Obviously, he didn't convert either of those pole positions into victories. In fact, it was quite the opposite, and he had a disastrous race weekend. What looked up was definitely not the case for him in what was a very disappointing weekend for him. But going through the race overall, it was for the first race, Nick de Vries, who claimed victory, and Mahindra's first victory in the Gen 3 car, which I think dates back to 2021 was their last victory, which is insane. A very good win for that team, and I guess it's just been a matter of time to see whether or not, de Vries would be able to convert a very good opportunity. He is also alongside a pretty good Mortara, so I guess it was just going to be a matter of time. But I think this race, if you had to kind of describe it to someone who didn't really race what was going on, there was an early, there was a little early kerfuffle between Nick Cassidy and Norman Nato, which basically saw the car of Nick Cassidy kind of come together going into the Nouvelle chicane. It actually caused Nato to actually retire the car for himself, and Nick Cassidy was given a 10-second penalty, which I did not agree with at all, but that's what the race stewards decided. I felt like it was an avoiding action that he had to make to be able to get away. Obviously, there was a huge congestion going into that chicane in the first place, so not really much that could happen. But because of that, they retired, and it kind of forced a flag, and it kind of then pushed back, or what was suspected to be a pushback of the pit boost that was happening. For those who are new to Formula E or don't know about Formula E, the pit boost kind of allows you to be able to recharge your battery to allow you to have more of that to be able to push. During the stages of the race, they usually say that there's a pit boost leader, and that pit boost leader is usually the one who's leading the pack out of the pit boost opportunity. Every driver has to take a pit boost during the race, so it's like if you had to pit, right? That's exactly what it is. It forces an additional added element to the strategy. But I would say that ultimately Dan Ticktum, who was leading the race from P1 for most of the race, had used up a considerable amount of his energy. And I think that he used his pit boost way too late. It was a pretty terrible, I would say, strategy call. Really unfortunate. He ended up using his pit boost 5 laps later. So Nick de Vries was ultimately able to then lead the charge through there. And then by that time, Nick de Vries was able to use his attack mode option to extend that lead, and then just being able to have the the veteranness and being able to conserve the battery just long enough to be able to then execute and use it to stay ahead. It was De Vries who ultimately came out on top. At the end of the race, there was a collision between Dan Ticktum and DaCosta, as Dan Ticktum, it was actually in the Nouvelle chicane as well. DaCosta tried to go on the inside left. Dan Ticktum kind of squeezed him a little bit in a move that the FIA deemed dangerous. It was a 33-second penalty for him, and he ultimately then fell down the order, not even getting a podium placing for himself. It was then that Pepe Marti, his teammate, who actually got pushed into, who had a quietly great race for himself, by the way. We know that he's raced around Monaco in F2 before, so he's definitely not new to the track or the circuit, but he ended up finding himself on the podium, which was awesome. And then Felipe Drugovich, who would then continue his exceptional weekend with a P2 finish in the second race, ended up claiming P4 for himself. De Vries in first, Mitch Evans ended up getting second, and for himself, that then pushed him in the lead of the championship, which was, for this guy who has never won a championship, I'm going to knock on wood here. Is this the year for him to win it all? I guess we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But for him, it was definitely a very strong drive from him, and also for him to, he has 5 podiums here in Monaco, so he definitely knows how to drive this circuit, and he is also a veteran who has shown that he understands these Gen 3 cars very well. And him leading the championship with, the Porsches kind of fumbling the bag this weekend, it was a good opportunity for him to look ahead for the second half of the season to potentially win his first championship. Then in the second race, as I had alluded to earlier, it was Dan Ticktum who started on pole position. And he actually did a little bit different of a strategy during the race. So in race one, he was out front, was obviously having to use slightly more of the battery than the people that were behind him. He kind of fell back to conserve that battery a little bit more, try and stay within the slip of the cars in front of him to allow a little bit less of that battery to be used to at least save him later on in the race. But he ultimately kind of made him and the team ultimately made a very similar situation where I just do not think that he took his pit boost, which for the second race, drivers could take a varying amount of minutes of their, of their attack mode. So those who are also new to Formula E, welcome. You can take, you have 8 minutes of attack boost, which increases your the output of your battery quite substantially. It allows you to kind of work your way up the order and strategically impact the race. So drivers can kind of take a 6-2. So you could do 6 minutes. You have to do 2, but you can take 6 minutes and then 2 minutes, or you can do 4 minutes first and then 4 minutes later on in the race. So you can pick and choose how much of that attack mode that you want to activate. But it was kind of a weird situation where he fell back from the front runners that were in front of him, and I think he used his pit boost way too late, and he just wasn't really able to contend with the race at all. The winner of the second race was Oliver Rowland, who actually had a phenomenal race for himself, and I wrote some notes about this, very unsurprising because, and I've always thought this, especially after last season, I think Rowland might be one of the smartest drivers on the Formula E grid in terms of what he's able to do in the cars, but just his awareness during the race is next to none in terms of his compatriots in the cars around him. He has looked very, very poised throughout his entire career, but for him to have done what he did in the race, coming from, I think he started the race, I think, in P15. I don't quote me on that, but he started a little bit back. And for him to have, I want to say at the halfway point of the race, about 3% higher than the front runners, was very telling of his ability to be able to conserve the energy throughout the race. He made some comments in the post-race saying that a lot of the drivers had gone pace-wise a lot faster than what was anticipated. So he had the awareness to recognize that a lot of people were probably expending their battery a little bit too much to start the race, which gave him that lead to then push even more during the windows. And he ultimately lost less battery in the non-attack mode phase for himself, which he was just able to then work his way up the order to then claim his 9th victory. And it was and this is something that I've begun to appreciate a lot in Formula E. And it's a different kind of racing from the likes of Formula 1. And I always tell people to give Formula E a chance because, Formula E it's a different series. It has its own kind of racing. It's very strategic in a way that no other series is like. I think people get the idea of battery harvesting, especially from Formula 1 right now, as a net negative. It might not look great on a hybrid formula scale, but in an all-electric series, it actually works out very well just because these cars just have that zip to them to allow the racing to always be competitive. And it's not even like during the race you can actually see these cars doing this coasting method for themselves. The racing is always back and forth, and I think that that's what is particularly interesting and very juxtaposing to the it's, I guess, what I call it, its sister series in Formula One. It's different, and I think that drivers like Oliver Rowland really get to shine in Formula E because of that kind of strategy, right? Being able to choose when to use the pit boost, understanding the effectiveness of free open air, and so much more. It to me, he looked so good in this race, and him being able to say, look, I recognize that. And on the broadcast, you could see that he was 2 to 3% ahead in terms of conserving his battery and still being able to contend with others that were using attack boosts earlier than him, and him being able to, I guess, stay away, like stave off the attack from those behind him. I just think he's at that point where he's been in this series, he knows what he needs to do, and he's a proven champion. So hats off to Oliver Rowland. And then Felipe Drogovic was the one who came in P2 for the second race. Even though it was Eduardo Mortara who ended up getting the second place, a 10-second penalty from earlier in the race with DaCosta ended up causing him to get a 10-second penalty and dropping him to P5 in the ending classification of the race. Could it have been Mortara's race had he not gotten that, and had knowing that he would be getting that 10-second penalty, potentially? He did start up at the top of the field next to Dan Ticktum, so it really could have been his race had that not happened. But it was because of that, it pushed Felipe Drogovic into his first podium in Formula E, which honestly I'm beaming about. This guy was the reserve driver for years after winning F2 with Aston Martin, and for him to then transition into Formula E in this year of learning for himself as a driver. To be able to get his first podium in Monaco, I think, is definitely very special. And he came out this weekend. I mean, he had P4 in the first race and P2 in the second race. So, like I said with, Caio Collet, where you got to watch out for him, the other Brazilian that you want to watch out for, I think, in Formula E is going to be Felipe Drogovic. I think he has the ability, and he's learning how to navigate these cars. I think there's going to be a very bright future for him. So a very, very great weekend for him. And then, I don't know if you caught what I said, but it was the collision with Da Costa on the opening lap. It was him who claimed P3, which is crazy to say, but that is exactly how Formula E is, I guess, right? The unpredictableness, the ability to be able to come back from what looked like a disastrous, unturning of events for him and the team. He came in, completely spun around, dropped down the order on the opening lap, found himself significantly back from the front pack, and was able to somehow, through great strategy, through an understanding of when to use his attack mode. I think he used it successfully right after the yellow. So he didn't activate it, so it didn't end up going into effect, because if you use your attack mode and the yellow flag comes out, like the full course yellow, the time still ticks, and so you're basically like wasting away that opportunity. He was able to successfully be able to, after the full course yellow, which pushed him up the lead because he stayed out, he was then able to use that pit boost to great avail and kept himself up there, and he ultimately was rewarded P3 after after what looked like to not have been a great running in the second race for him. Some good luck and some very good driving for him ended up seeing him in third place for the second race of Monaco this past weekend. I would say that this was a hero to zero weekend, and that phrase was actually used on the broadcast for Dan Ticktum. I would say that De Vries and Rowland winning over Ticktum, I think, shows the team is very young, and there's still a lot of growth, I think, for that team, specifically in terms of being in the front, right? I mean, no one expected, I don't think anyone suspected Dan Ticktum to be on pole once, let alone twice. Being able to manage these races on pole position is very, very difficult, and in Formula E, it's no guarantee that the pole sitter will always necessarily net a victory because of, the different, the pit boost, the attack mode, but even just battery management out front is not always the most favorable all the time. So that's just kind of the unpredictableness of Formula E. But also, I will say that there was some things that Dan Ticktum kind of shot himself in the foot with. The penalty that he got in the first round, a 33-second penalty, that could have been a podium potentially. But it was what it was. I watched it back, and I saw he was looking in his right mirror, and then he kind of made the move left. So the intention was what it was. Was it ambitious for Da Costa to go in and lunge at that? Yes. It's racing. He was at fault for it. Ticktum was at fault for it, so he suffered that. But then in the second race, it was a speeding penalty for him that dropped him down even further after he'd fell back from the front runners in that case. So it was just a really unfortunate weekend, and for a driver who is, I guess, his drive in Formula E is still there's no information yet on whether or not he will have a seat in 2027. There is still, I guess, a lot to there's a lot for him to have to fight for in Formula E, and a team will have to then potentially see that from Dan Ticktum to say, well, or at least warrant him a drive for next year. So, I mean, what could have been a very good weekend for him kind of flipped on its head. The other one that I wanted to say was that Mitch Evans is leading the championship, but it was also Oliver Rowland who won the second race, who is now in second place, and that's just how close the top standings are in Formula E. It's going to be a very exciting second half stretch of the calendar season, and I encourage you, if you've never watched Formula E before, definitely give it a shot, give it a watch. I think it's a little bit different. It's very entertaining, and I think that the growth of Formula E, and I've talked about this in my previous podcasts, that the growth of that series definitely is going to continue to multiply as time goes on, especially with at least the reception that has been given from the Gen 4 cars and the announcement of them and the look of them. It's very exciting, very exciting. But I had a great time watching the series, unfold in Monte Carlo this weekend, and we'll be going on into China for the next leg of the series. And ending this episode off of the Open Wheel FM podcast, I wanted to kind of touch into what is, I wouldn't say they're predictions because I don't always love to give predictions, but I feel like I can kind of talk a little bit about Formula One going into Montreal this weekend, just kind of highlighting what I think might happen. It is a sprint weekend in Montreal, which will be very interesting. The changes in the Miami Grand Prix looked decent, but I do think that is very track specific. I don't know how these cars are going to perform in Montreal. I know that there is definitely not as accessible of braking zones for Miami compared to the Canada Grand Prix this upcoming weekend. So there may be some starving of the cars, even the hairpin, I think it's like a 2.5 second break. So it's not as much as like the 3.5 second one that is in Miami. So I do think that we will see some more obvious, I guess, situations of lifting and coasting throughout the race. And I think that that's just kind of how these cars are. And I also don't really think that we are at the worst yet. Monza, Baku, and Las Vegas are all on the calendar. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I know that there is a large perception going on in Formula One that the racing is abysmal. I hope that they can kind of level the storm as long as they can throughout this season. There's already been some changes to the 50-50, which I addressed in last week's episode, to the power units, moving towards a 60-40, which is great for the future, but we still have an entire calendar year, essentially, in Formula One to address. There's going to be a lot of upgrades coming into the Canada Grand Prix this weekend. I would say pretty much every team will be bringing a little something to this race. I know that Williams has talked up having a pretty, I would say, large package. So, I mean, they seem to be on the up and up right now, which is great. Mercedes will be bringing their first big package of the year. They didn't bring anything to Miami. So it will be very interesting to see how the performance of the Mercedes car will be in the race and qualifying, and whether or not we will see a Mercedes victory again this year in Montreal. So we'll just have to wait and see how that all goes and how that plays out. In terms of how I think it is going to play out. I think that Mercedes has looked historically very well here in recent years, including last year. Kimi got his inaugural podium in Canada, so where he got P3, so it was an excellent drive for him. So he definitely is very capable of driving on that track. George Russell has also looked outstanding, right? After having a crazy one-stop strategy, only to be taken away for plank wear, where, you know, he didn't end up winning the race, even though he crossed the finish line first. I mean, he's looked really good on this track as well. Obviously, Lewis, historically, is... I think he's the winningest driver, actually. Yeah, he is the winningest driver in Canada, so you can't count him out, even though he's had a pretty rough, I would say, 2 outings compared to the other, like, top 6, top 7 runners. And Max Verstappen has been lights out here as well. So, and with an upgraded Red Bull car that looks a little bit more to his liking, I don't really think you can count him out either. So that said, I think that George Russell comes out on top. I think Kimi right behind him, and I think Lewis will get third. I think Lewis will find a way to get himself on podium this weekend somehow. And I only say that too. I know that the Ferrari cars are not great in straight line speed compared to the Mercedes car, but weather may play a factor on Sunday. And we know that a wet Canada race can bring about anything. You can ask Jenson Button that. So yeah, that's who I think is going to be on the podium this weekend. I don't know if that's going to be right, but it's going to be a big weekend for Formula One to, I guess, speak to the naysayers of the series and whether or not they're going to be able to deliver a good race. It's hard to say. The numbers and the potential doesn't scream that necessarily, but that is also just where we're at with Formula One at the moment. So with all of that being said, I just wanted to close off this episode by thanking you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. If you liked anything that you heard, again, make sure to like and follow this podcast episode, at least to keep up to date when I release more of these episodes in the following weeks as well. This upcoming weekend, I'm going to be covering all things of the Canada Grand Prix in Montreal, as well as the big one, the Indy 500. So lots and lots of racing this weekend that I'm going to be watching. So, it may be slightly longer episode next week. I don't know. We'll see. But thank you guys so much for staying and sticking with me through all of this. I hope it was interactive and gave you something to think about. Again, let me know who you think is going to come out on top at the Indy 500 race. And also let me know who you think is going to come out on top in Montreal. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. But with that, thank you guys so much for listening. This is the Open Wheel FM podcast. My name is Nicholas Clay, and I am signing off. Peace.